Welcome to Strange Things with Chris James. I decided to do another UFO show, seeing as the Edinburgh UFO Festival and Conference is going to be this weekend. I'm going to be, or I already was, at the festival, depending on when you listen to this show. If you listen Friday, I'll be there. If you listen Saturday, well, I'll have already left. Of course, this show is made possible because the Organic Man coffee trike keeps me caffeinated. They keep me going, and they keep my cats going as well, it seems. They only have the best coffee in the world. Stop by and have a cup, or two, or three. The store hours are 6:30 a.m. until 7 p.m. 4501 McPherson here in Laredo. If you're not in Laredo, you can get the best coffee in the universe at organicmancoffeetrike.shop. UFOs are kind of considered to be an open secret in the military, and people have been reported seeing them for years, decades. The trouble was, those in charge told us only crazy people saw UFOs. So if you wanted to report a flying saucer sitting in your backyard, you had to be crazy. This became a big problem for those who saw flying discs but weren't crazy. Any pilot who reported seeing anything up there no one could explain was immediately put on a desk for the rest of their career. Why did the government suddenly stop accepting UFO reports and pile derision on anybody trying to make one? It all stems back to the Robertson's panel. In the late 1940s and early 50s, you could call the local air base and report a saucer sighting, and the military would take note of what you'd seen and they would actually look into it. The Robertson's panel was committee formed in January 1953, headed by Howard P. Robertson. The panel was created and funded by the Central Intelligence Agency, who had discovered there may be a huge problem. During the Cold War, had the president needed to, say, contact Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming to alert them that those Ruskies are coming over the North Pole, all the phone lines might be tied up with folks making UFO reports. There were only a few phone lines going into the bases at the time. Not wanting to face another Pearl Harbor, the CIA decided to do away with any and all UFO reports coming from us citizens. To keep people from saying they saw a flying saucer, the panel recommended strongly suggesting those who did file reports were either mistaken, not all there mentally, or downright lying. They encouraged reporters and news anchors to handle all stories as if it were just a joke. Anytime they did interview someone, they would usually pick somebody who you could tell there was something wrong with them. They'd stick a microphone in somebody's face who was obviously delusional or drunk or crazy and interview them. The constant bombardment of jokes and misdirection has had a profound impact on people, even 70 years after it began. I am constantly running into people who will say things like, oh, come on, UFOs aren't real, or you don't really believe in those things, do you? UFOs are seen by fighter pilots so often that their existence is an open secret in the Air Force and in the Navy. In 2007, the Pentagon secretly started the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. It was an unclassified but also unpublicized investigatory effort funded by the United States government to study unidentified flying objects, or, as they like to call them, Unexplained Aerial Phenomenon. The program was first made public December 16th, 2017. It cost $22 million, and they said it was only funded for 5 years. From 2008, Luis Elizondo worked with the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence in the Pentagon. Elizondo said the 5 year program actually ran until 2017, 5 additional years. He was the director of Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification. Elizondo said he thought he might have been selected for ATIP because he had a scientific background and he worked in counterintelligence. Plus, he was not interested in science fiction or flying saucers. Back when Captain Ruppelt was running Project Blue Book, he specifically looked for airmen who neither believed nor disbelieved in flying saucers. He wanted people with an open mind, but not so open that their brains would fall out. According to the Department of Defense, the ATIP program ended in 2012 after its 5 year run. Elizondo said he worked with officials from the U.S. Navy and the CIA out of his Pentagon office for an additional 5 years, ending in October 2017, when he resigned to protest what he characterized as excessive secrecy and internal opposition. Elizondo asserts that underestimating or ignoring these potential threats is not in the best interest of the department, no matter the level of political contention. After Elizondo went public, a smear campaign was launched against him. Things were passed on to reporters, implying the man was not all there upstairs, or he was simply lying to get his name in the papers. Pentagon officials came out saying Elizondo didn't even work at the ATIP office. Elizondo filed a complaint with the agency's inspector general, claiming that a coordinated campaign to discredit him for speaking out, including Pentagon press statements asserting he had no official role in the UFO research, even after his role had been officially confirmed. Elizondo also stated he was the target of a personal vendetta from a Pentagon rival. A retired U.S. senator publicly said that he can state as a matter of record that Luis Elizondo actually did work in the ATEP office. This is a common action anytime a witness comes forward with something those in power want to keep secret. If the evidence cannot be disproved, they go after the person with claims they're lying or crazy. If you can't disprove the evidence, you attack the witness. Lieutenant Ryan Graves, a former F 18 pilot, has talked about some of the many sightings he and the men in his unit had in the past. They saw UFOs flying around them while they were on maneuvers. These were not weather balloons, but some kind of intelligently operated craft. In one incident, two jets had to swerve to avoid hitting something that looked like a dark gray cube that was inside a clear sphere, which stood motionless even though the wind was blowing quite strong where they were at. As much training as these men received, they are well aware of all kinds of aircraft. If they can't identify it, it has to be something bizarre. U.S. Navy veteran fighter pilot Commander David Fravor was witness to the 2004 Nimitz UFO incident. He said, "This is not like we saw it and it was gone, or I saw lights in the sky and they were gone. We watched this thing on a crystal clear night with 4 trained observers." As I was digging around looking for information, I kept seeing UAP instead of UFO. I've said it many times. The government is so dead set on never ever admitting that UFOs exist, they had to change the name when the lid was pried off and the truth began to leak out. If you go to Russia or Japan or any country that you can visit and you say UFO, most folks will know exactly what you're talking about. Say UAP, and they're probably going to think you're trying to sign them up for some kind of a retirement program or something. Our country is supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This means that we decide who runs our country and what we should be allowed to know. The folks we don't elect but are appointed by the elected officials have come to the conclusion that they know far better how our country should be run. And a lot of them are getting rich at the same time. Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, are put in Washington to make all the decisions on running our country and keeping us safe. The guys with all the stars on the uniforms are supposed to answer to Congress and as well as us. We are their bosses. We pay their salaries in the form of tax dollars. When Congress asks, "What are those lights in the sky?" they should receive an immediate answer. But instead, they get a bunch of excuses and run around about how we might get an answer in 5, maybe 10 years. It wasn't until 2019 that pilots in the Navy and the Air Force were even allowed to speak out on things they'd seen while in the air. Before that, it was verboten to speak on such things. This didn't mean there weren't any UFO sightings. It was those in charge wanted to ignore them. Kind of like some major stationed in Hawaii back in, oh, say, December 1942, saying, "Oh, those planes flying towards us? Ignore them." The reason given are anywhere from anyone seeing UFOs must be crazy up to those things are all demons flying around and we have to ignore them for some good reason. I've talked to some folks that when asked about UFOs, they immediately went into a lecture about demons and how their preachers said ignore them and they'll go away. If your house is filled with smoke and you ignore it, it's not going to go away. If the skies are filled with UFOs and you ignore them, I don't think they're going to go away either. There are some folks in the Pentagon who want to ignore UFOs, thinking if they do look into them, it will shorten their careers. They don't want to miss out on that gravy train. This falls under nonfeasance, failing to do the job that they were hired to do. There are probably quite a few people in the Pentagon who say UFOs aren't real, so stop talking about them, while at the same time they know what these flying craft are. There are way too many reports of the military and aliens working together. I don't believe this is in any way for our betterment. If it was, why all the secrecy? The legal term for this is malfeasance, doing their jobs but in a really bad manner. To make matters even worse, these are usually the same military leaders who will deride and reprimand underlings who do come forward to talk about UFOs. They must be getting a lot of money, or maybe it's the power. The aliens are, for some unknown reason, working hand and claw, allowing certain members of our planet to go rich and powerful, while at the same time treating the rest of us like cattle. A member of the House of Representatives came out and said, The status quo on the part of the U.S. government has been to leave the American public in the dark regarding information about UFOs, refuse to answer questions posed by whistleblowers, and avoid the concerns of Americans have about the possible threat UFOs pose to our national security and public safety, and default to extreme and unnecessary overclassification. Navy pilots have testified under oath to Congress about how UFOs pose a potential national security and safety of flight risk. Navy pilots flying off the coast of Virginia encountered a UFO. It was well inside our airspace. The craft had no visible wings or engines. It didn't show any form of power or engine exhaust. It just hung there in the air. The craft shot away so fast, had any human been inside, they would have been crushed under the enormous forces. The craft had stayed in the air for about 10 hours. Several of the jets nearly ran into the UFO as it performed unexpected changes in direction. The pilots had to file near collision reports saying they almost ran into a UFO. Even with the new reporting system, pilots are still hesitant to say they saw something. All it would take is a change in the upper echelon, and suddenly the pilots will be behind a desk once more. That's what we need more of in this country. Highly trained people doing jobs that they're not satisfied with because it's far beneath their training level. I remember when the military announced they were going to allow the pilots to report UFOs without worrying about losing their flight status. A lot of folks got excited thinking, oh, the government was going to look into UFOs at last. The military was only allowing these reports to be made. They weren't thinking about letting us know about any of them. Plus, this only affected military pilots. Commercial pilots are in the air a lot more hours and have far more sightings, and many of them are retired military. Yet none of the commercial airlines have come out with a system for their pilots to report any kind of sightings. The FAA has no direct process for commercial pilots to report unidentified or anomalous objects in our airspace. FAA regulations direct pilots to report UFO incidents to civilian organizations without official follow up or analysis via a verified official data set. The lack of FAA interest perpetuates stigma for the commercial pilots and discourages them from coming forward. Further, commercial pilots face potential retaliation from their employers, including cease and desist letters for speaking publicly. Pilots are afraid of potential administrative punishment or failure to achieve medical flight status for reporting a UFO. So if a pilot is flying along with with a 747 full of passengers, I know that's an older airplane. I don't know what the new one's called. Anyway, he's flying along and he's got 400 people in the back of the plane, and a UFO darts in front of the plane and he almost hits it. He can't report that to the FAA. He's supposed to report it to the National UFO Reporting Center. Does that make any sense? Even when Congress told the military to talk about UFO reports, the Pentagon did their best to drag their feet and not talk about alien spacecraft. The first report, that's not what I would call it. It came out telling Congress what they were going to tell them, but it didn't tell them anything. The report went like this: we're going to tell you all about these things once we figure out how to tell you without actually telling you anything. That's just my take on the whole thing. The report said Our analysis of the data supports the construct that if and when individual UFO incidents are resolved, they will fall into one of five potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, a natural atmospheric phenomenon, USG or U.S. industry development programs, foreign adversary systems, and lastly, the other bin. Other as in unknown flying objects. The report listed 144 UFO reports from credible, that's not drunk or crazy, witnesses. All of these were military pilots. The number 144 doesn't sound all that big considering how many planes are in the air every day. Months after the report was delivered, it turned out that 144 reports were actually well over 400 reports, but somebody must have gotten the digits out of order or something. Maybe it was the same people in charge of the census. One of the UFO reports was from a former Navy pilot who saw a red square the size of a football field hovering in the sky for nearly a minute before zipping off. The sighting was reported near Vandenberg Air Force Base in 2003. Our elected officials asked UFO witnesses to come testify with the promise of no ramifications from the military upper management. Ryan Graves, a former Navy pilot and founder of a nonprofit organization focused on UFO sightings, testified about his own sightings on the East Coast in 2014 and 2015. Graves was asked about the Vandenberg sighting. He said he didn't observe it himself, but a lot of witnesses had come to his organization, Americans for Safe Aerospace, with firsthand accounts and evidence, which included police reports and other documentation. He said a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large, 100-yard sided red square approaching the base from the ocean and hover at a low altitude over one of the launch facilities. According to the witness, the square hovered for about 45 seconds before taking off. Graves also said there were additional reports of sightings later that evening after the sun had set, including some aggressive behavior. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before changing directions and darting off. More than 30 commercial air crews and military UFO witnesses have approached Americans for Safe Aerospace to share their accounts. It is sad and annoying how anyone wishing to report a UFO sighting has to go to a privately run organization such as ASA or Newfork to tell what they've seen. Our own government spends billions of dollars studying monkeys on drugs, but they shy away from helping out us citizens. If you've never seen something really unusual in the sky, it sometimes has a lasting effect on the witnesses. They begin to think maybe they're seeing things, or maybe they're not right in the head. Having someone who will listen and sometimes add other sightings of the same or similar craft sometimes makes these witnesses feel less troubled. It's like going to a therapist without having to pay all that money. I've had a few folks who just wanted to get their sightings off their chests. They didn't want any written record. They didn't want any notoriety. They just needed to talk it out. And once they told someone who was willing to listen, it made them feel better. At a 2021 news conference on UFOs, Robert Jacobs, a former first lieutenant at Vandenberg, said a telescope video camera his crew had set up at the base to record a missile test in September 1964 captured a flying saucer shaped object that went around the top of the warhead and fired a beam of light down on the top of it before flying out of frame. Jacobs said that the footage was later cut and that he was warned by his superior never to talk about this incident. The Pentagon's new Office for Investigating Potential UFO Sightings received hundreds of new reports in 2022. And while it can explain about half of these away, that leaves half of them that are still a mystery. The All Domain Anomalous Resolution Office and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence say they're focusing on any reports coming in from military pilots. It looks like they spend most of their time coming up with new names for their office and not much else. One of the more compelling accounts of a UFO encounter came from retired UFO Navy fighter pilot Alex Dietrich, who described seeing a highly unusual object off the coast of Southern California in 2004. Dietrich said, "It was this sort of roundish oblong shape, and it didn't have any apparent flight control surfaces. It seemed to be bouncing around and changing course very quickly, and in a way that we would not have been able to maneuver our own aircraft or certainly be able to keep up with." Jeremy Corbell, a filmmaker in possession of U.S. Navy footage showing pyramid shaped UFOs flying off the coast of California, believes the footage is potentially the best the world has ever seen. The Pentagon has confirmed that the 18-second video of three UFOs hovering over the USS Russell in June of 2019 is authentic. It's the first footage the public has seen of the unmanned aerial vehicles that reportedly harassed at least three warships during military drills over multiple days. They call them unmanned because no one, well, no human, could withstand the rapid maneuvers being performed by these craft. At one point, the UFOs matched the speed and bearing of one destroyer for 90 minutes off the coast of San Diego, according to the ship's log. The green tinged video, which is now public, was gathered by the Pentagon's Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force and leaked to filmmaker Corbell, who made the documentary Bob Lazar, Area 51, and Flying Saucers. Corbell is also in possession of three photos from a Navy ship that show a spherical UFO descending into the sea and disappearing without a trace. The UAPTF, which was formed in 2020 to improve the U.S.'s understanding and gain insight into the nature and origin of UAPs, particularly those incursions by unauthorized aircraft into our training ranges or designated airspace, is reportedly investigating the incident. Reportedly. They'll let us know in about 10 years. Corbell said the fact that the government has classified the UFOs as unidentified aerial phenomenon, can't we just call them UFOs, means officials have decided they are not balloons or drones, according to the report. Our government, for the people, of the people, and by the people, is having a hard time getting any information from the military, even as the budget is being okayed. In other words, if the Congress doesn't say yes, the military doesn't get any money. So, at the one hand, they're saying UFOs, yeah, we'll tell you about that in about 10 years, but give us the money. That's the military for you. The three military veterans testified in Congress hearing on UFOs. A former Air Force intelligence officer said the U.S. government has operated a secret, multi decades reverse engineering program of recovered vessels. Now, these are not just lights in the skies, these are actual flying craft that they've gotten their hands on. He also said the U.S. has recovered non human biological entities from these crash sites. If you heard me talk about the Laredo incident, this would be the tomato man I was talking about. If I were sitting there in Congress and somebody said they had alien bodies at a base in the United States, it would be time for a field trip. Stop right there. Let's get going. Of course, my security clearance ran out years ago, and it was never anything to get excited about. It was just secret, which meant that I could read a report or two. I never read any reports the entire time I had a clearance. Never saw anything cool either. Just think of it. The military, who are supposed to answer to Congress, is holding bodies of aliens from other star systems, but they have to have super wow top secret and above clearance just to see them. This is, of course, for our own good. The whole War of the Worlds, people going crazy, dogs and cats living together, that sort of thing comes up anytime somebody wants to know why we, the people, can't know something. Congress must have been napping because they focused on making it easier to report UFO sightings for the military. What about the bodies? I guess it would be too much to wish for a subpoena to produce one of these bodies. Something. How about the reverse engineering of flying craft? Can we see one of those maybe? Instead of focusing on reports, how about let's see one of these flying discs? Bring it into Washington. Let the public, let the press, let somebody look at it besides a bunch of guys with stars on their uniforms. Retired Major David Grush, who went from being a part of the Pentagon's UFO task force to becoming a whistleblower, told the House Oversight Committee's National Security Subcommittee that he had been denied access to some government UFO programs, but that he knew the exact locations of UFOs in the U.S. possession. Defense Department spokeswoman Susan Go issued a statement saying the Pentagon's inquiries had not turned up any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any program regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exists today. Major Grush also said the U.S. has retrieved non human biological matter from the pilots of the crafts, adding, that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the UFO program he had talked to that are currently still on the program. Gersh said he hadn't personally seen any alien vehicles or bodies. His testimony was based on the accounts of over 40 whistleblowers he interviewed over 4 years in his role with the UFO task force. We have a government entity, the UFO task force, that can't get answers from a government entity, the U.S. military. He said, my testimony is based on information I have been given by individuals with a long standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country, many of whom also shared compelling evidence in the forms of photography, official documentation, and classified oral testimony. Grush said, adding that the trove of evidence has been intentionally kept secret from Congress. Several times during the hearing, Major Grush deflected lawmakers' questions, saying he could only elaborate in a sensitive, compartmented information facility. A skiff is an ultra secret room where officials and government contractors take extraordinary precautions to review highly classified information, like the cone of silence in Get Smart. He was asked if the government had any contact with aliens and whether anyone had been murdered to cover up information about extraterrestrial technology. Grush said, no comment. The former intelligence officer also told the panel that he and several other colleagues had been the targets of administrative terrorism and that he has at times feared for his life since coming forward. It sounds like the answer to folks being murdered is yes. The government is focusing only on military pilot sightings. This is only the reports pilots feel safe in pushing forward. How many pilots and folks on the ground or on the decks of ships held their tongues thinking this whole UFO reporting unit is just some kind of a trap to lure people into talking about things that they shouldn't? The idea being the government isn't so much looking for UFOs, but the people who will talk or not talk about them. Stay in the if you stay in the branches of the military long enough and you become just a little bit paranoid, that's kind of normal. I've known some guys with years in units that we don't talk about. A few were just this side of being certifiable. One guy didn't own a cell phone, a computer, or any kind of digital equipment. Nothing like that was allowed in his home, which was out in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. He did have electricity, so he wasn't quite like Kaczynski, but he was highly paranoid. He didn't trust the government that he worked for. In order to get to the bottom of these things flying through our airspace, the military is focusing on about 5 to 10% of the total sightings. There were 7,263 UFO sightings in the U.S. last year, according to the National UFO Reporting Center. Our military is looking at 400, of which they say half are just mistaken sightings. Why aren't they looking into that 7,263 other sightings? Retired Navy Commander David Fravor was also called to speak to Congress to tell about his UFO encounter in 2004. This is that famous Tic Tac UFO seen on every show about flying saucers for the past 3 years. Him, along with three others, were flying around to their carrier group when they spotted something under the water. It rose up and took off through the sky. The description was a huge white cylinder, rounded on each end. It had no wings, no rotors, no means of propelling itself. As he and the other pilot tried to get closer to the mysterious craft, it rapidly accelerated and disappeared right in front of their aircraft, leaving no detectable turbulence. The two pilots and two crewmen could only watch as the craft vanished on the horizon in seconds. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, Fravor said. I'm not a UFO fanatic, but what we saw with four sets of eyes, we have nothing close to it. It was incredible technology. Once back on their ship, no official inquiry was undertaken, just a brief after action report. It took several years before anybody in a higher position even asked about this UFO event, and once somebody did ask, it was a non starter, just basic questions on what they had seen. A lot of talk went on about flying craft. It was said, in not so many words, these are not ours, they're not the Russians, they're not Chinese. The idea that no human could possibly survive the maneuvers being witnessed by the pilots came up several times. This led to the assumption going around that these craft were unmanned, flying drones. No one wanted to broach the idea there might have been aliens inside at the controls. Even after Major Grush had said the military had recovered bodies not from this Earth, no one was willing to say we have beings from distant planets running around on our planet. Some folks like to refer to those beings as our space brothers. We come in peace. We traveled millions of miles to help you become better citizens of the universe. I don't think so. Why did I just hear Gru's voice? If these beings are here for our benefit, why do they abduct people in the middle of the night? Why do they attack kids, making their waking lives into nightmares? How about the cattle mutilations still going on today? We've had several right here in Texas recently. If these aliens are really here to help us out, why all this sneaking around? Why not land in the parking lot of the local Walmart? Hand out some free energy or something useful. If nothing else, how about a coffee cup with a flying saucer on it? I've already got several. Mm. Even if some of our military know what's going on, these UFOs do pose a real threat to our world, not just to our country. If a bunch of UFOs are seen flying through the skies over Canada, say they're flying from the North Pole south, the folks in Cheyenne Mountain, they see these and they get nervous. It could lead to a nuclear war. We've already had a UFO hit a plane and bring it down. The crash in the zone of silence back in 1974. This is the one that we know about. How many plane crashes might have been caused by either hitting a flying saucer or the pilots taking evasive action in an attempt to avoid what they thought was a pending collision? And keep in mind, when the Mexican military showed up at the scene of the crash, all those soldiers died mysteriously. The U.S. military went in wearing hazmat suits to recover the crashed saucer, what was left of the plane, and then they burned everything that was left behind. What kind of a horrible disease or virus is coming out of some of these crashed ships? In February, we had a rash of UFO sightings that got a lot of folks up in arms. The U.S. Air Force was called on to go have a look and do what they felt was necessary. Necessary turned out to be several $1,000 missiles fired at these flying things. The four objects crashed to the ground and the bits were all recovered. All anyone did say was the four objects were vastly different in size, shape, and materials. Nobody outside the military was allowed within miles of the site until all the pieces had been picked up and taken away. An Air Force spokesman came out and said one of the objects was a Chinese weather balloon. I wonder if he was able to keep a straight face when they told him, tell him it was a weather balloon. They're dragging that one out again. The other three were reported as being unknown. They were unknown and flying. It has been well over half a year now, and we still don't know what the military shot down. What worries me is the military is still saying they don't know what these three objects were. The boys in the white lab coats should have been able to at least say these things aren't from here, this planet. Nobody has come forward saying the objects were made of metal or plastic or rubber. Nobody has come forward saying their craft was shot down. Is the military waiting, hoping that the public will simply forget about all those things? Until analysis is done on the recovered pieces, the U.S. Air Force general tasked with safeguarding U.S. airspace, General Glenn Van Herk, said the military would be unable to identify what the three most recent objects were, how they stayed aloft, or where they came from. Asked whether he had ruled out extraterrestrials, Van Herk said, I'll let the intel community and the counterintelligence community figure that out. I haven't ruled out anything. Top Pentagon officials insist they are committed to trying to unearth any buried secrets about UFOs that national security agencies have been accused of shielding, even from congressional oversight committees and top officials in the executive branch. They're going to tell us about Roswell. No, they're not. Some lower level airman has been tasked with looking for evidence in a warehouse filled with old boxes of records dating back to the Civil War. He has a cheap flashlight and a notebook and orders to have a look. Let us know if you find any UFO reports. What they are more than likely doing is dragging their feet, hoping that something will pop up to draw attention away from UFOs. Folks today have a very short attention span. As the congressional inquiry moved on, it became apparent that only the folks doing the questioning were looking for answers. With the testimony from a few pilots that were willing to come forward, things did come to light. We do not control the airspace like some folks would want you to believe over our own country, let alone the planet. There are craft zipping around up there far superior to anything that we have, us earthlings that is, ever designed. Gersh, Graves, and Fravor echoed similar sentiments, saying they would like to see a safe and transparent centralized reporting system. The men added that they are hopeful the public discourse is the first step towards eliminating the stigma around reports of UFOs to encourage others to come forward. Graves, the ex Navy pilot, estimated that only about 5% of the UFO sightings are reported to the All Domain Anomalous Resolution Office and the Office of Director of National Intelligence. He said, I urge us, the country, to put aside stigma and address the secret security and safety issues this topic represents. If UFOs are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem. If it is something else, it is an issue for science. In either case, unidentified objects are a concern for flight safety. The American people deserve to know what is happening in our skies. It is long overdue. I'm wondering, when is the U.S. government going to come up with a 1-800 number for you and me and the rest of the citizens to call in to file a report? We are still being told by the government that if we see a UFO, we're to report it to the New Fork. The House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence public hearings was the first one on UFOs since 1968 and was followed by a closed session where technical details of sightings could be discussed without breaking military secrecy rules. As for that 1968 study, that would be the Condon Report, where Edward Condon had already decided UFOs were nothing but hoaxes, delusions, or stupidity in 1967, before the study even got started. Why would the military and the intelligence community want to keep UFOs and alien technology secret? How about the biggest reason? Money. There's a lot of modern technology out there today that just might have come from other star systems. By controlling the things that we all want, people can become rich beyond their wildest dreams. Also, there have been some activity most people would consider illegal and immoral, There are some who believe the end always justifies the means. Right after Roswell, President Harry Truman instructed Secretary of Defense James Forrestal to set up Operation Majestic 12. The blue ribbon top secret panel, headed by Vannevar Bush, a leading Manhattan Project figure and the creator of the Memex machine, which was the forerunner of the modern day computer. Forrestal became disillusioned with the committee he had formed, saying the citizens of the United States deserve to know about UFOs. He attempted to go public when something happened. He might have been given some drugs, LSD or such, and soon found himself in Bethesda Hospital. The day he was to be released, he was suicided. All the medical staff that knew him were sent away and replaced by folks with an agenda. His murderer was made to look like he had killed himself. MJ-12 eventually brokered a sit-down between space aliens and President Dwight D. Eisenhower, during which an agreement was reached to enable alien studies of human biology by way of abductions and animal mutilations in exchange for use of extraterrestrial technology that would lead to developments like the B 2 stealth bomber. This was all done for the good of America. Well, at least those who run things from behind the scenes. John F. Kennedy sent a memo addressed to the CIA in which the president requested confidential information about UFOs. The memo was written November 12, 1963, where the president ordered the CIA director to organize the agency's intelligence files relating to UFOs and to brief him on all unknowns by the following February. 10 days later, Kennedy was assassinated. Later, it was suggested that John Kennedy had threatened to reveal the MJ-12 alien negotiations as being the prime reason for his assassination. What was being kept from the president that was so secret it was deemed necessary to kill him to keep it from being disclosed? Kennedy was entering open negotiations with the Soviets to make the moon landing a joint effort and to look into UFOs or flying saucers so that nobody with nuclear weapons would mistake them as being a sneak attack. December 1965, a reporter and news director for the local radio station WHJB, John Murphy, arrived on the scene of the Kecksburg UFO crash before authorities had arrived. He had received several calls at the station from citizens. He took several rolls of photographs and conducted interviews with the witnesses. When the Air Force arrived, all but one roll of film were confiscated by military personnel. Office manager Mabel Maza described one of the pictures that he was able to keep. It was very dark, and it was with a lot of trees around and everything, and I don't know how far away from the site he was, but I did see a picture of a sort of cone-like thing. It's the only time I ever saw it. In the following weeks, Murphy became fascinated with the incident and wrote up a radio documentary called Object in the Woods, featuring his experiences and the interviews that he had conducted. A week before the documentary was to air, he received an unexpected visit to the station, two men wearing black suits who identified themselves as government agents. They requested to speak with him in a back room behind closed doors. The meeting lasted about 30 minutes. A WHJB employee, Linda Foshi, recalled the men confiscated some of Murphy's audio tapes from that night and that no one knows what happened to the remaining photographs. A week after the visit, Murphy aired a censored version of his documentary, which he claimed was because the people that he had interviewed had all said that they didn't want any notoriety because they were afraid that they would get in trouble with either the police or the army. The new version contained nothing revealing and did not mention an object that had crashed in the woods at all. People at the station and the folks that knew him said the aired documentary was entirely different from what Murphy had originally written. It was missing all the eyewitness accounts, interviews, and any substance concerning a crashed UFO. After the airing, Murphy became uncharacteristically depressed and completely stopped all investigations into the case and refused to talk to anyone about it. Murphy never gave clear reason why he had suddenly lost interest in anything to do with UFOs. February 1969, Murphy was struck and killed by an unidentified car in a hit and run while crossing a road. The hit and run occurred near Ventura, California, while Murphy was on vacation. No one was ever arrested for the killing, and the case was dropped way too soon, considering a man was killed by an unknown person. In 1978, Tony Dodd was a highly respected North Yorkshire police sergeant. It was about 2:30 a.m. and he was driving around Skipton as part of his supervising of the night patrol. He had patrol officer riding along to give the beat officer some time off his feet. As they came around a curve, they saw a massive disc with a dome shape on the top. It also had small, round portals along the sides as well as a skirting at the bottom. Three half spheres protruded from underneath in a triangular shaped formation. Dodd, the young beat officer, opened their car doors and stepped out, looking up at this flying craft. It moved at about 20 miles an hour towards some woodland in the distance. As they watched, the UFO moved over the trees, becoming just a glow on the horizon. The two constables got back in the car and they just sat there, not saying anything. After a few minutes, lights appeared coming towards them. This turned out to be another patrol vehicle. The two officers were excited after having seen a UFO, and they wanted to know if the sergeant and the other constable had seen it as well. There were four witnesses, all telling the exact same story, the same description. Over the next 10 years, Dodd saw many more strange craft flying over the area where he was working. He would bring curious friends along who wanted to see UFOs as well. When Dodd retired from the police force, he went on to become a UFO investigator. He recorded many sightings from people who had seen things that they could not explain. Tony Dodd died at age 74 on March 24th, 2009. The official cause is listed as being a brain tumor, but a lot of people believe he was given this malady by either the government or the aliens. Ron Rumel had a background as an Air Force intelligence agent. He was the publisher of a magazine called Alien Digest. Some of the topics discussed in Alien Digest revolved around the idea that aliens were indeed on Earth and had long term plans to use humans as a food source. In early August 1993, Ron Rumel, also known as Creston, was found dead in a Portland, Oregon park. He'd been shot through the mouth and was reportedly holding a gun in his hand. The police labeled it a suicide and they cremated the body the next day without performing an autopsy or notifying any of his relatives. People who were able to see the scene of his death before it was cleaned up and his body destroyed said that there was no blood on his hand or on the pistol. Also, they said there was a distinct smell of some chemical they thought might have been sodium pentothal. The pistol had no fingerprints on it whatsoever, and not even his. Those that knew him thought he had been gotten too close to the truth concerning aliens and the government. Paul Vigay was a British computer consultant notable for working in developing and supporting RISC software and named as the leading expert on UFOs and crop circles. Vigay worked with Mel Gibson on the film Signs. He was working on software that could be used to analyze crop circles and energy spikes that are seen during ghost and UFO investigations. Vigay's body was found off Portsmouth Beach on February 20th, 2009, after being reported missing the previous evening. The authorities said it was suicide, but those that knew him said Vigay was not the kind of person that would kill himself. They believe either the shadow government had him killed or maybe it was the aliens. He may have been getting too close with his research. What I find mind blowing is how, when the news began telling people that UFOs have been pretty much acknowledged as being real, we might have some of their bodies on ice in some secret military facilities, most people went, "Oh, okay," and they went back to their cell phones. I still get folks asking if I really believe in UFOs. Have people been so desensitized by movies and TV shows that they no longer wonder just what is going on around us? Or could this be a direct result of maybe over medication or something that's put in our water or maybe in the air around us? Those who want to control the world are controlling the people as well. Kind of a drug induced hypnosis that removes the desire to look into strange things. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, let your friends, let your relatives, let people you don't even know, people you don't even like, know that they should be listening to strange things. Or not. It's your choice. I'm not going to force you one way or the other. Hope you made it to or will make it to the Edinburgh UFO Festival. I hope to see you there. If you don't make it, well, maybe plan for next year. Normally, the festival and the conference are held in April of every year, but for some odd reason, they're having it in August instead. And also, for some odd reason, I keep calling August September. I've been doing this for years now. I get August and September confused, and I don't know why. It's not old age because I was doing this when I was like 30. I get them back and switched with each other. It's one of those things. Anyway, if you did enjoy the show, let other people know. If you didn't enjoy the show, push the thumbs down button twice. It works better that way. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. And now for the exit music, Baby Fly.